For section 4.3, we are going to look at congruent triangles. So we're going to start off with 3 vocab words here. The first one is corresponding angles. And corresponding angles are angles that are in the same position in polygons with an equal number of sides. And corresponding sides are sides in the same position in polygons with an equal number of sides. And then congruent polygons are 2 polygons that are congruent if and only if their corresponding angles and sides are congruent. So have some pictures here. These are properties of congruent polygons. So in the diagram, it's for the triangles, it's telling us that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And if you notice, they're color-coded. We wrote the A first in the first triangle, so it is congruent with angle D, so the D is in red, so it has to be written first. The same thing with B. B was written second in the first, so it's congruent to E, and E has to be written second in the second set of points for the second triangle. So you have to match them up. And then the sides are, congruent sides are represented by the tick mark. So the sides that have 1 tick mark are congruent, the sides that have 2 tick marks are congruent, and then the sides that have 3 tick marks are congruent. And the same goes for the angles. The angles are have the little arcs in them. If there's 1, then those are congruent, 2, those are congruent, and so on. So we can write 3 congruent statements using the angles, and we can use 3 corresponding sides using just the sides. It goes for the rectangles. So color-coded again. Notice in the congruent statement here that they're color-coded. The P goes with the W, and the Q goes with the X, and the R goes with the Y, and the S goes with the Z. So we can write, since there's 4 angles, there's 4 angle congruent statements you can write. And there's 4 side congruent statements that you can write. All right, moving on. To name a polygon, you can write the vertices in consecutive order. So that is moving yourself around the polygon. So if I were to draw a polygon named PQRS, I can go around this way and name it. Then it's saying I could do QRSP, so I could start at the Q and move myself around this way to name it. Or I can start at the S and go backwards, SRQP. I'm going around it to name it. But then I can't do PR. I can't go across, then up, and then back across. We can't cross the figure when we name them, so make sure you're not doing that when you write names of figures. And then the second one in the congruent statement, the order of the vertices indicates the corresponding parts, and we talked about that up here with the color coding. P goes with W, so if P is first in the first polygon name, then W has to be first. You have to line up the congruent angles when you're writing a congruent statement. All right, so for example 1, triangle RST and triangle XYZ represent the triangles of the space station support structure. If the triangle RST is congruent to, and Cami doesn't like that congruent symbol, triangle XYZ, we are going to have to identify all pair of congruent corresponding parts. So it didn't say angles, it didn't say sides, it said parts. So we have to do all of them. So what I'm going to do is look at this. I have triangle RST is congruent to triangle XYZ. That's what they gave us right here. So that tells me R is listed first, so angle R is congruent to angle X. S is second, so angle S is congruent to what's second in the next one, angle Y. And then angle T is last, so it is congruent to, that's terrible congruent symbol, it is congruent to angle Z because Z is last. And then we can do the sides. We have RS first, so segment RS is congruent to segment XY because those are the first two there. We can do ST in the first, they're next to each other, is congruent to YZ in the second. So we have RS is congruent to XY, and we have ST is congruent to YZ. So the last set we have is RT, so the first and the last is congruent to XZ, which is the first and the last over here. So those are the 6 congruent statements that we can make about those two triangles. All right, so for example 2, we are given that triangle EHF, that's pretty interesting because there was a triangle there. EHF is congruent to triangle GFH. So if we look at the picture here, EHF is the triangle on the left and GFH is the triangle on the right. So those two triangles are congruent. And it's telling us that E and G are first. So E is congruent with G. And H is a 90-degree angle, so that other side there has to be a 90-degree angle as well, since that is a straight line. So part A is asking us to find the value of X. So what I just said there in that previous statement kind of helps that out. So they have labeled that angle 6x minus 12, and I just said that that angle has to be 90 degrees since the other side is 90. So we can do 6x minus 12 equals 90, and then we have to solve for that. So we add 12 to both sides. And we get 6x equals 102. And then we're going to divide both sides by 6, and we get x is 17. So that's what they asked us to find there. And then we are asked to find the measure of angle GHF. So GHF. This totally messed up and flipped these letters around on these two examples. I'm not sure what happened here, but that's not what the question says. It's supposed to be GFH. So GFH is here to here. So we want this angle over here. Let me take care of some of those lines there. So we want this angle right here. So we just said that this angle is 90. And this angle is 90. And they've labeled this angle E 21.6. So the other angle over here, G, has to be 21.6 because they had given us the statement that these two triangles are congruent. So now we can use that information to figure out what the angle F there is. So we can add 90 and the 21.6 together. We get 111.6. And we know that 3 angles in a triangle add up to 180. So we are going to subtract. I have to do some borrowing. So I get 68.4 for that angle. All right, and then for our last example here, we are given that angle P and M are right angles. R is the midpoint of PM, and PQ is congruent to MN, and QR is congruent to NR. So we are going to have to write a proof that triangle PQR is congruent to triangle MNR. So we're going to have to figure and prove that those two triangles are congruent. So we're going to start off with what we were given here is that angle P and angle M are right angles. So angle P and angle M are right angles. And remember, our proof is that was given. And they are shown here by the little boxes. And then if they're both right angles, that means they're equal to each other or congruent to each other. And that is because of the right angle theorem, right angle congruence theorem. And then angle PRQ, so angle PRQ, so this angle here and this angle are congruent because they're vertical angles. They're across that point from each other. So angle PRQ is congruent to angle MRN, and that is the that's a terrible V, vertical angles theorem. And if we prove that, now we have proved that this angle and this angle are congruent, and this angle and this angle are congruent. Now we have that third angle that we automatically know is congruent because now we've proved that 2 out of the 3 angles in the triangle are congruent. So we can say that our angle Q is congruent to angle N, and that's because of that third angle theorem that we talked about in the last few days. And we were also given, so now we know that this is congruent here. R is the midpoint of PM, so we have to use that. And that was given. So this is the midpoint. And if that's the case, if that's a midpoint, then that proves that this and this, those two segments are congruent. So PR is congruent to RM, and that's because of the definition of a midpoint. A midpoint is exactly in the middle, making the two segments congruent. And then PQ right here and MN are congruent, and QR and RN are congruent, and that was given to us up there in the first part of our example. So PQ is congruent to MN, and QR is congruent to NR, and we say that was given. And if we look, we have taken care of all 3 angles and all 3 sides here. So then we can jump right to that the 2 triangles are congruent because we have proved all sides and all angles. PQR is congruent to triangle MNR. And that is the definition of a congruent triangle. Congruent triangles are all angles and all sides are congruent.